People say the Bible has been changed, copied and recopied over thousands of years until the original message was lost. Today we are going to look at what the manuscript evidence actually shows. And the numbers are so overwhelming, so far beyond any other ancient document in history, that the claim the Bible was changed is not just wrong, it is the opposite of the truth. Welcome back to the Empty Tomb channel. One of the most common arguments against the reliability of the New Testament is this: how do we know what we read today is what was actually written 2,000 years ago? People copied these documents by hand for centuries. Surely things were changed, added, removed, altered to fit someone's agenda. That is a fair question, and it deserves a serious answer. Today we are going to look at that question through the lens of textual criticism, the science scholars use to compare ancient manuscripts and reconstruct original texts. And what that science has found about the New Testament is absolutely extraordinary. To understand why the New Testament evidence is so remarkable, we first need to understand how it compares to every other ancient document we accept as historically reliable. Let's open the case. Exhibit A. Let's start with some documents that historians accept without question as reliable ancient sources. Julius Caesar wrote his account of the Gallic Wars, one of the most studied documents in ancient history. How many manuscript copies do we have of Caesar's Gallic Wars? 10. We have 10 manuscript copies. The earliest one was written about 1,000 years after Caesar died. The works of Plato, one of the most important philosophers in human history, how many manuscript copies do we have? 7. The earliest copy is from about 1,200 years after Plato wrote the originals. The works of Aristotle, 49 copies, the earliest from about 1,400 years after Aristotle. Historians accept all of these as reliable. Nobody questions whether we have an accurate version of Caesar or Plato or Aristotle. The manuscript evidence is considered sufficient. Now let's look at the New Testament. Exhibit B. How many manuscript copies do we have of the New Testament? Are you ready for this number? Over 5,400 Greek manuscripts, more than 5,400 copies of the New Testament in the original Greek language alone. When you add manuscripts in other ancient languages, Latin, Syriac, Coptic, Armenian, the number rises to over 24,000 manuscript copies of the New Testament. 24,000 compared to 10 for Caesar, 7 for Plato, 49 for Aristotle. The New Testament is not just the most well-attested document in all of ancient history. It is more well-attested than the next 10 ancient documents combined, by a factor that is almost impossible to comprehend. F. Bruce, one of the most respected New Testament scholars of the 20th century, wrote that the evidence for the New Testament is so overwhelming that no classical scholar would dare question it if it were applied to any other ancient document. The only reason people question the New Testament is not because of the evidence, it is because of what the New Testament claims. Exhibit C. Now let's talk about the time gap between the original documents and the earliest copies we have. Remember, for Caesar the gap was 1,000 years, for Plato 1,200 years, for Aristotle 1,400 years. For the New Testament, the earliest manuscript fragment we have is called the John Rylands Papyrus. It contains a portion of the Gospel of John. It was discovered in Egypt and dated by scholars to approximately 117 to 138 AD. The Gospel of John was written around 90 to 95 AD. That means the gap between the original and this copy is somewhere between 20 and 50 years. 20 to 50 years, not 1,000, not 1,200. Within living memory of the events described, within the lifetime of people who were actually there. If the text had been significantly changed, there were still people alive who knew what the original said, and who would have objected. By the time Caesar's Gallic Wars was copied for the first time, every single person who had been alive when it was written was long dead. There was no one left to object to changes. The New Testament was copied while eyewitnesses were still alive. That is a completely different standard of accountability. Exhibit D. Now let's address the real question. Even if we have thousands of copies, how accurate are they? How do we know scribes did not change things as they copied? When scholars compare all 24,000 manuscripts against each other, they find that approximately 99% of the text is in agreement across all copies. The variations that exist are almost entirely minor. Different spelling of names, word order differences, small scribal slips. None of the variations affect any major doctrine or teaching of the New Testament. Bruce Metzger, one of the greatest New Testament textual critics of the 20th century and not a religious apologist, concluded after a lifetime of studying these manuscripts that the New Testament text is remarkably well preserved. He wrote that the essential teachings of the New Testament are not in doubt. We know what the original said. To put it another way, if you stacked all 24,000 manuscripts on top of each other and compared them, the differences are so minor that the entire New Testament could be reconstructed from the agreements alone. The text has not been changed. The evidence proves it. So let's bring this back to the jury. The claim was, the Bible has been changed over centuries of copying. We cannot trust what it says today to reflect what was originally written. The evidence says the opposite. If you trust Caesar, if you trust Plato, if you trust Aristotle, you have no rational basis, based on manuscript evidence alone, to distrust the New Testament. The New Testament is not just as reliable as those documents. It is exponentially more reliable. By every standard that historians use to evaluate ancient texts, the text has not been changed. The evidence is overwhelming, and what that text says about who Jesus is, what he did, and what it means, deserves to be taken seriously. Next, we are going to look at one of the most powerful single pieces of physical evidence ever discovered. A stone, with a name carved into it, the name of the man who crucified Jesus. That is the next case file. Subscribe to the Empty Tomb channel. Follow the evidence.